So the title of our uh, discussion this morning, Schools Out for Summer, Jewish Perspectives on Vacation and Recreation. Schools Out for Summer, for those who are not as familiar, Alice Cooper's famous theme song. I will spare you my singing it. You can look it up yourselves. And this is, of course, relevant as many of our students are finishing their school year this week, some next week. But the idea of as we start a summer season where there things are a little bit more slower paced, a little bit more relaxing, a time for recharging, just the idea in terms of attitudes, approaches, sources that Judaism has with regards to the idea of recreation. Right? On the one hand, we're supposed to enjoy we're supposed to optimize, do everything l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. We know, terms like bittul Torah are sometimes used for wasting time. We're supposed to, of course, take care of ourselves, as we'll see in some of the sources. And so I figured we kick it all off with the Knicks, because that's very relevant in terms of what type of engagement should we have with professional sports. You may have seen a discussion online, various articles about recognizing, the playoffs were on Shabbos and playoff games, and there's a very famous clip from WFAN of the announcer, the sportscaster, mentioning, well, look, if you can't watch it on Shabbos, then don't find out for 24 hours and keep it a secret and watch it afterwards. Right? That's kind of like the old style. Record the game, and when someone calls you, answer the phone saying, "Hello, don't tell me who won because I recorded the game." Right? We live in an age where that doesn't work as well. I think we've mentioned before the role that shul security guards play in giving people the news, whether it be about Israel or sports scores. But this was just kind of an interesting exchange of the where religion and Knicks meet. With regards to the Knicks winning on 6/13. They won on June 13th. Source number one: for some Jewish fans of the New York Knicks, the most salient number related to the team's NBA championship win on Saturday was not 94, the team's final score, or 53, the number of years since the last title. It was 6/13. The number is meaningful in Jewish tradition because it signifies the number of commandments or mitzvot outlined in the Torah. For years, the number has hung from the rafters of Madison Square Garden to reference the number of lifetime victories notched by Red Holtzman, the Jewish coach who led the Knicks during the previous championship runs in 1970 and 73. On Saturday also became the date the Knicks championship dry spell was broken, June 13th, or 6/13. For some Jews watching, the confluence of 6/13s was evidence of divine intervention in the Knicks title win. Yossi Farrow has made a name online by posting pictures of himself aiding Jewish celebrities, including athletes, and applying prayer phylacteries, tweeted an image showcasing the 6/13s in Knicks lore. Faith, history, legacy, he wrote. Amazing how sometimes everything comes full circle. Some online Jewish commentators found even more to read into the date. Moshe Spern, a New York City educator and activist, noted that not only 6/13 is significant, but 26. The rest of the date also resonated. 26 is the gematria of Hashem's name, he tweeted, using the Hebrew name for God and referring to the Kabbalistic practice of assigning numerical value to letters and their combinations. He concluded, today is a miracle. Okay, for some, it was a miracle. For some, you haven't necessarily heard of the Knicks. But there is this seeking to find some sort of Jewish infusion, even in some of these non-religious aspects, but in particular as it pertains to sports. There's probably a lot more to discuss in terms of Jews and sports. Although one of my favorite lines is the line from the movie Airplane, which do you have any light reading? And the stewardess says, yes, take this pamphlet on Jewish sports heroes. And it's just, one page long. That in my other favorite line, that the bar mitzvah is where the Jewish boy realizes he's more likely to own the team than play for it. And, but sports does enter into discussion with regards to Jews and Yeshiva University, their Maccabees, and all of that. We'll maybe touch upon that soon. But when it comes to Sports, we're looking for some Jewishness in there. We want to feel part of it. We want to be a part of it. We want to find a way to make it an activity that fits with our religious values and lifestyles. At the same time, that's not always the case. So when looking into this, I found an article from the New York Times in 2014 by the Jewish writer Joseph Berger. Summer camp has a place to study. No examination of Hasidim would be complete without a look at how they spend their summers. I'm an alumni of the Catskills, bungalow colonies of the early 60s. But when I visited the Catskills in recent years, I was struck by the fact that almost all of those colonies, or the ones that have gone to seed, were filled with Hasidic families who have transformed the old Borscht Belt into an archipelago of Eastern European shtetls. The first thing I noticed was the basketball courts. Courts I dimly remembered were an occasional arena for stars like Wilt Chamberlain, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. But these courts were now dilapidated. Their playing surface cracking. I asked Rabbi Indid why they were in such poor shape, and he told me the boys never play basketball. The sect's most esteemed Grand Rabbi, Joel Teitelbaum, had warned that if boys play basketball as children, they'll play ball as adults and neglect the study of Torah and Talmud, a central obligation for all men. When I saw the swimming pool, or should I say failed to see the pool, since it was hidden by a tall fence put up so the sexes should not gaze upon each other, I knew I had a story of a highly unusual camp, a place for study. When I learned that even leisure activities were tinged with Hasidic intensity, boys, for example, watched the sheep being sheared to learn how prayer shawls and tzitzis were fringed, I found the story irresistible and returned last week for a second visit. You can go on, read the whole story there. But the idea that, leisure activities, as we might normally associate them, were not found in these camps because it has to be more of a Jewish activity. So for fun, we watch the sheep get sheared and make the tzitzis as recreation. So how do we balance some of these themes? The idea of the recreation, the idea, as we'll see in source number 3, the idea of health, the idea of culture. So let's go to the sources. Very famously, there is this idea of Nishmartem ma'od lenafsho seichem, which can be translated in many different ways. Here I translate as you are to take exceeding care of yourselves. Now, this could be spiritually, this could be for divine purposes, this could be avoiding idolatry or pagan practices. All of those are referenced in Devarim chapter 4. But this Nishmartem ma'od lenafsho seichem, this type of a verse, or Hishamer lecha, guard yourself, are often used with regards to health. Rabbi Eliezer Melamed sums it up with regards that Mikol zeh hinenu lomdim ad kama mitzvos adam lishmor al chayav u'briyosov. Person has to be very careful to watch over their health and their vitality. He actually mentions here, this is the source, Mamela borur shemin haTorah asur la'asher. It's biblically forbidden to smoke, which is a subject that we've talked about in different contexts, but and how complicated it is because many observant Jews, like other people, smoke. But I utilize it that the idea that this idea of there's a mitzvah to be healthy and to engage in healthy activity is something that is seen to be very straightforward enough that it should be forbidden to smoke. Which puts the onus on those who do to try and explain themselves. And Rabbi Moshe Sternbuch, who we've quoted before, the head of the Eda HaCharedis, the ultra-Orthodox religious community in Jerusalem, commenting on this verse in source number 5, that says, "Ein lizalzel b'chashivas briyos haguf." You should not be, you shouldn't be lenient. You shouldn't make light of the importance of taking care of the body. And he says, we've already heard from Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, as you start the second page, the famed founder of the Musar movement. Right? He says that it's the Yetzer Hara, which is convinces a person that they shouldn't look after their health, or you have a cold, don't take care of it or try to go beyond it. It's really the Yetzer Hara that gets in the way for a person to ignore their health needs. And it concludes, you have to, just like we said, you have to avoid the Yetzer Hara. You have to be careful and avoid the Yetzer Hara in this type of a situation. Rabbi Jacob J. Schachter, an article about this, quotes from the Chafetz Chaim in a talk that he delivered to students. He exhorted his students to care for their bodies and not to learn too much, which he feared may weaken them and cause them to fall ill. Therefore, it is necessary to rest and refresh and breathe clear air, he told them. He recommended taking a walk in the evening or resting at home, and where possible to go swimming in order to strengthen the body. He continued, too much diligence is the design of the evil inclination, because it will lead one to cease Torah study entirely. Right? You need if you don't take care of the body, then the soul will suffer as well. And this idea in terms of ensuring that the activities that one engages in are there to supplement and help and make the body healthy has a long history in the halachic discussion. So, for example, the Truman Hadeshen, taking us back to kind of the 14th century, is describing he's describing the Eruv that we have on Shabbos. So the Eruv concept is usually associated with carrying on Shabbos. That is one type of Eruv. That's the Eruv Chatzeros. It is the Eruv that combines properties and courtyards, and that allows people to carry from one to the other. Now, of course, there are two other very famous Eruvs, right? The Eruv Tavshilin, that which connects the cooking, right? That allows preparing on Friday, when Yom Tov is on Friday, to cook for the next day, to cook for Shabbos. We just had one on Shavuos. And there's also what's called the Eruv Tchumin, the extension of boundaries. One we don't really encounter as much these days. Technically, you're not allowed to go more than 2,000 amos, which is about 3,000 feet. So like 0.7 miles. You're not allowed to walk beyond that, the city limits, beyond 0.7 miles, beyond the 2,000 amos or so. Part of resting on Shabbos is remaining in your area. And you can extend that, though, by setting up kind of a way station or setting up a meal at the edge of the boundary, which allows you to keep extending it. And really the goal sometimes was to connect two communities together. Very often these days we don't encounter it because those of us who live in the Northeast Corridor, you can essentially walk the entire Northeast Corridor and you don't end up going into the wilderness. So you can go from Atlantic Beach into Far Rockaway, into Queens, Brooklyn, Bronx, Vermont. However far you want to extend it out there. Maybe getting to Vermont could be hard, but you can certainly go. If you follow these roads, you're not really exiting. But the Eruv Tchumin was once much more a common phenomenon. You would get to the end of the city limits, you could go a little bit further, and then you'd have to stop, unless you extended that boundary with the Eruv Tchumin. So that's what the Truman Hadeshen is discussing in source number 7. And he notes this idea of having this Eruv, whatever the Eruv is, it's really for mitzvah purposes. And he talks about what happens if there was a nice place to walk. Pardes Yafeh, he says, towards the end of the first line. There was a nice orchard. There was a park. There was a nature place that was outside of the Tchum, that was outside the permissible boundaries. Right? You want to go there on Yom Tov to have an enjoyable time, probably talking about on Yom Tov because that would allow you to carry things. It was probably harder to extend the Eruv that allows you to carry that far, but you want to take a nice Yom Tov walk. And he says, he was asked, is this a Dvar Mitzvah? To take a night, to walk on Yom Tov in a nice, lush park, is that a mitzvah? So he says, it is a mitzvah. Enjoying oneself on Yom Tov by a nice nature walk is a mitzvah. So when you talk about what we saw from Rabbi Sternbuch and Rabbi Schachter quoting the Chafetz Chaim about these rabbinic exhortations of engaging in these types of leisure activities, they're building upon a tradition that existed in halachic and legal sources to recognize some of these activities as having religious significance. Source number 8. Is the commentary of Rabbi Yisrael Lifshitz, the Tiferes Yisrael on Mishnah. So he's writing, later on. He's writing in the 18th century. It's a commentary on Pirkei Avos, where the Pirkei Avos is describing that to acquire Torah knowledge is a serious endeavor. And the Mishnah has the 48 behaviors or parts of the lifestyle that are part of becoming a Torah scholar. And generally, it's about little sleep, little food, and one of the things is miut sicha. You can't talk so much. You're not supposed to talk when you're supposed to study Torah. This is kind of this Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. In that 6th chapter, it's called the instructions for Kinyan Torah. How does one become a Torah personality? And generally, you think things like what they call hasmada. There's diligence, and you have to have amelus. There's effort. There's yagia. Right? You put all of your exertion into it. And so, when commenting on miut sicha, Rabbi Lifshitz notes devarim shel mabekach. What you shouldn't be talking about words of mabekach. What's mabekach? What's up? Right? Just chitter chat. Idle conversation. Right? Miut yafal Torah, but he says, but having a little bit of it, miut sicha kadesh tanuach nefesh ksatz. When you think about miut sicha, you might think it means don't talk a lot, but no, he means you should have minimal socializing. You got to have a little socializing. You got to take a break and I guess kind of more like the water cooler conversation. It's not that you don't talk. Miut sicha means avoid talk. Miut sicha means while you're studying, you take a break and have a conversation. It's the idea that some of these activities are there to allow oneself to have the proper balance of passion and effort in the religious pursuit, but also recognizing the human side as well. Caring for one's health, taking a break, going for a walk, having a small schmooze, right? These are all part of the process of balance that is not only in terms of the balance behaviorally, but also religiously is recognized as well. We see this also with regards to the idea of playing ball on Shabbos. What about sports? And we talked about this a couple months ago when we look back at the challenges for maintaining or encouraging Shabbos observance. We talked about how in the book of Nehemiah, some 2,500 years ago, they were also worried about Shabbos observance. And the Shulchan Aruch says one is forbidden to play with a ball on Shabbos and Yom Tov. That's source number 9, Shulchan Aruch 308. The Rama, Ashkenazi commentary, there are those who permit it, and the people's custom is to be lenient. Right? So he's not saying what you should do is, World Cup soccer every Shabbos morning, but there does seem to be this recognition of that there are those who permit it, and people's custom is to be lenient. The idea of finding this physical outlet in a way that's not prohibited can be something which is engaged with, and the practice has come to allow these types of leisure activities. Now, at the same time, there is this more restrictive view, which also is in competition between the more permissive and the more restrictive. So much so that with regards to one of the other laws of Shabbos in terms of how people spend their Shabbos day, source number 10, after the morning meal, we establish learning to read the prophets, expound on Haggadah. Right, Shabbos morning, you go to shul, Shabbos lunch, and after lunch, you should study some more Torah. And it's forbidden to establish a meal during that time. The idea is that the afternoon should be dedicated to more spiritual pursuits. So the Mishnah Berurah comments on this in source number 11. Why is there so much? Why is Jewish law kind of rigorously enforcing scheduling? Why is there such a strict schedule? And the explanation that is given, he says that Jewish law recognizes that during the week, people are busy. And so therefore, Shabbos and Yom Tov are days, kedei lasok bahem b'Torah. These are days to engage in Torah, because the rest of the week, you don't have time to study regularly. On Shabbos, you're not working, so there you are. You can appropriately engage in religious study. So therefore, since Shabbos is a time where we are pushing people to engage religious activity, there can't be any social gatherings, meals, whenever there's a shiur in the Beis Medrash, right? Kind of, it's an interesting, phenomenon that, sometimes you'll have mincha, and after mincha is the shir, but people come to mincha, then they go home and have their own shalosh shunis. That would seem to be against what the Mishnah Berurah is describing as the appropriate behavior. Maybe they're going back for their own Torah study, but he says the idea, why is it so regimented? Why is it so negative on encouraging? You have to have the study. You can't have the meals. What does it mean you can't have the meal? Because when there's Torah study taking place on Shabbos, there shouldn't be this social behavior taking place on Shabbos. If you want to have that, you have it before the shir or after the shir. Yakdim oso, yacher oso. And then he says, Zehu tochachas migula. This is very, we're not pulling any punches here. Lo san hanashim shemitaylim be'esahi b'shukim u'rechovos. Those who decide to take their Shabbos walks at this time, also it's inappropriate. Kafilu suda Shabbos mitzvah asur. We're saying on Shabbos you have to have shalosh seudos, you have to have your third meal. You can't have your third meal when the class is being given. So if you can't have your meal, which is a mitzvah, then how much more so you can't go on a walk to take on walks that are not required activity. Also, you may end up having lots of idle chatter, which is prohibited. So there's a tension. On the one hand, taking a walk is a mitzvah. Having a little bit of a water cooler conversation is helpful, is menuchas hanefesh. At the same time, there's the same encouragement to be more rigorous in terms of our scheduling, especially on Shabbos and Yom Tov, to be engaged in religious and spiritual activities. So there's often we could probably say everything in moderation. But on the one hand, health we take very seriously. The idea of how that is the right balance between taking the appropriate time off in leisure activity to supplement and strengthen our ability to engage in a more substantive religious activity. It's meant to, if one should suffuse or one should fuel the other, recognizing that these leisure activities can be determined and seen as mitzvah opportunities as well. And then, but there's a danger, and we see that the Mishnah Berurah recognizes that aspect as well. Questions, comments on some of the technical behaviors permitted, prohibited, or encouraged or discouraged, and then we're going to look at kind of more the general cultural aspect of this as well. Okay. So let's look at some of the more broader cultural views on this. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was asked about attending sporting events. Good thing that the playoffs are over. And he talked about just in general, anything that's done outside, anything that's part of the non-Jewish culture is often connected with this idea of what's called u'mechukosehem lo seilechu. We see, and again, you're not supposed to engage in non-Jewish behavior. Originally started with idolatrous behavior. Now that there's less idolatry, we don't really talk about idolatrous behavior. We talk about non-Jewish behavior. And this was something that extended not just to things that are necessarily religious or cultural and the like, but even things that were just done. So for example, and we've discussed this before, some of the earlier sources that dealt with this, 400 and 500 years ago, had to do with wearing certain clothing that were worn in the university settings back then. Remember, university settings back then were much more distinctly religious. So, for example, the robes that the professors wore or the graduates wore, would those be allowed to be worn by Jewish graduates? And this came up in particular, the conversation in a lot of these Italian medical schools in the 1500s. The rabbis were addressing it, and there were those who prohibited non-Jews do it, we can't do it, and then there were those who said, well, the non-Jews are not doing it for a specifically non-Jewish region. It's more cultural. It's not religious. It's not going to be prohibited, and hence, plenty of Jewish schools will wear caps and gowns to this day. Those that don't are taking a more, a more restrictive or countercultural view. We don't have to do what the culture does. So it's within that backdrop that Rav Moshe Feinstein is addressing this idea of going to sporting events. And he was asked in source number 12, it's Tadion Sport Biyamedim, right? Very relevant. We got FIFA going on still. Can you go to a theater or a sports stadium? So sport. So in theaters where they're having entertainment, or stadiums where they're having sport, this is not about non-Jewish religious practices. This is not idolatrous. This is not religious. We get into the realm of, is it frivolous or is it taking away from Torah study? And then some of these things can be licentious. What are you looking at? What's the environment? So Rav Moshe Feinstein moves it away from the explicitly religious and maybe even from the legal realm into the ethical, moral realm. Maybe it's not whether or not you could, it's whether you should. Now, he does point out that some of the situations may lead to, people who are, certain types of behavior that takes place there, whether that's appropriate to be watching. Right? We just had the parsha Lo Sasu Acharei Levavchem Acharei Neichem. You don't want to be seduced by your eyes into worse behavior. But Rav Moshe Feinstein moves it away from the specifically religious into the realm of cultural, as well as into the realm of if it's preferred. What else could you be doing at that time? Right? Rabbi Moshe Feinstein very famously would carry Mishnayos with him, that if he was ever waiting for a ride or a bus, he would study a few Mishnayos, and he completed Mishnah several times from those extra moments. But if you're not Rabbi Moshe Feinstein and you'd be just doing nothing, then it's a different matter. But we saw how the Mishnah Berurah was commenting in the previous sources about that Jewish law developed a certain Shabbos schedule to encourage certain behavior, and even prohibited some mitzvah behavior in order to encourage Torah study. We see Rabbi Moshe Feinstein extending this in terms of being sensitive to the negative impact of engaging in those cultural, recreational activities. It's not prohibited, but it's concerned about.
In the Korach story, basic things and asking questions of Moshe were under the theme of Leitzanut as well. So
it's so there's that concern, and I think that concern is legitimate. There are all sorts of things that can lead to the slippery slope. But again, there are. Rabbi Feinstein is pointing out that sports is not prohibited. Attending a sporting event is not a religious violation of the following in the ways of the non-Jews. It's just a question of whether you should be there, whether there's other things that could be going on, or whether there's a slippery slope you need to be concerned with. And the answer is definitely yes. It's a kind of, in some ways, it's the, we talked about the meta halacha, the meta issue of health, and that is a religious value, and that leads to halachic determinations, like it's forbidden to smoke. In terms of how that transmits into leisure activities, some people walk, some people don't walk. We saw that leisure activities can be qualified as mitzvah activities as well. And then, of course, it requires how to moderate and schedule it within other religious obligations. So now, in terms of the meta issue of attendance and cultural, these types of events, there is the recognition that it doesn't necessarily have a very specific legal analysis, right? This is not idolatry. At the same time, we then have to go through the slippery slope as to whether these are the activities that should be engaged with. So again, coming from a more legal perspective, Rav Kook had this is not a dissenting view, but it's the idea of looking at the leisure activities or the sports activities from a different lens, of a more holistic spiritual lens. And that makes sense from Rav Kook's overall persona and his overall hashkafa, which was much more integrative in terms of the various endeavors of different types of people, different types of Jews, religious, non-religious, Zionist, non-Zionist, Torah educated, non-Torah educated, to find a more holistic view. He saw things as much more complementary. So, for example, when it comes, just as an example, when looking at the modern age, the 20th century, right? Rav Kook died in 1935, so he's alive as the 20th century ideologies are exploding, whether it be Zionism or communism or socialism or the rise of a certain atheism. The idea of God is dead. Rav Kook said atheism is a challenge and opportunity of the times, because when there's so much a focus on atheism, that means the response has to be a focus on God. You're thinking about God if you're a ferbrenta atheist who doesn't want to believe in God. That's a lot of conversation about God, or that sparks conversation about God. So it's not the idea of Rav Kook is not promoting atheism, but he's pointing out that a world in which atheism is a topic of conversation is at the same time, in some way, a conversation about God. So it's a much more integrated approach. And he says the same thing with regards to exercise. And he was in his Orot, he was talking about exercise, and in particular, the Zionists were very high on physical activity, right? In some ways, the whole Lag BaOmer as a holiday was energized by the fact that the Zionists took it as a field day, going outside and bows and arrows and everything like that. And some of it was co-opted by the religious as well. But so when addressing that phenomenon, so Rav Kook writes, source 13, the exercise that the youth of Israel engage in the land of Israel, strengthening their bodies to be strong and mighty children for the sake of the nation, perfects the spiritual power of the supernal tzaddikim who engage in unifications of the holy names to increase the prominence of spiritual light in the world. He sees it as two sides of the same coin. You can be a tzaddik, focusing on the supernal spiritual light, or you can be playing sports to engage in physical perfection. When young people engage in sport to strengthen the power and spirit for the sake of the might of the entire nation, that holy service raises God's presence higher and higher, as it is raised by the songs and praise that King David expressed in the book of Psalms. By means of supernal intentions, the inner soul rises. By means of actions that strengthen individuals' bodies for the sake of all, the outer spirituality rises. These two together bring to perfection the arrangements of all holiness, emphasizing the character of the nation in that small phrase upon which all the limbs of the Torah depend. In all your ways, know him. Right, so Rav Kook is not disagreeing with Rabbi Feinstein about the dangers of attending sports events. He's just noting that in the grand scheme of things, the fact that there are those who are less religiously observant or knowledgeable who pursue physical, that's also helpful if they are proud Jews and doing so to strengthen their bodies to build the land of Israel. Or maybe an extension could be the fact that they have Mincha and Ma'ariv Minyanim at the sports stadiums is a kind of a combination. Or maybe some of the sentiments that were expressed, Nix 613. The idea that people are seeing within some of the things which are outside the religious confines, finding some connections with religion, spirituality, holiness. That's definitely a more Rav Kook mentality, which also was found the fact that he sees this as something that all things that we find in God's creation can contain holiness. It was made. There's an article by Avram Melnikov, a journalist in the Jewish Chronicle in 1925. Rav Kook spent time. Actually, it's 1935. The article typo. Rav Kook during World War I spent time in London. And Melnikov is talking about art. He was also an artist, and he was interested in the biblical prohibition of making graven images that had so much influence. So one day I talked to the late Rabbi Kook about this prohibition. We talked about art, and he told me the following story. When I lived in London, I used to visit the National Gallery. My favorite pictures were those of Rembrandt. I really think Rembrandt was a tzaddik. So, a couple of interesting situations. They're talking about art and graven images. Okay, that's something we've also spoken about. But he appreciated Rembrandt, and he went to museums. So there's he's living those sentiments that are being expressed. That there's something to be said for an appreciation of, or engagement with, or encounter with things which aren't explicitly uniquely religious, spiritual, Jewish. There's a way that those experiences can be productive, can be positive. Whether it's, and again, if we're talking about the season of vacation and recreation, going to a museum and appreciating the beauty would fit with that, right? There are all sorts of specific examples with regards to Jewish law, with regards to many of these issues. Going on vacation opens up all sorts of kosher questions and minyan questions and Shabbos questions, and sometimes the liturgy changes if you're davening in a house versus davening in a shul, right? Those are all details that emerge from this, but from a more holistic meta discussion, whether it be the leisure, whether it be recreation, whether it be appreciation, some of the activities that we engage in, as Rav Kook said in the end of source number 11, quoting the verse, B'chol derachecha d'rehu, encountering God, knowing God in all of one's endeavors, is something that stands out as a very Jewish opportunity this time of year, especially. So, going to the museum and appreciating beauty, going to the sports event, making sure there's a minyan to daven in and kosher food. These are all expressions of this type of a perspective. Now, I want to just also talk a little bit about vacation explicitly, right? We never take a vacation from Judaism. That's always the sentiment that Jewish day schools have to impart upon their students, right? One of the saddest things in the world is if, the last day of school, they have all the kids go home and people left their siddurim or their tefillin. Maybe they have extras at home, but, you don't want there to be a vacation from God, a vacation from Judaism. Because the idea is meant to be, because we're always in the game. So just two stories of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, two insights. One is when the Rebbe talked baseball. And the story is recounted in a number of different places, and it's there in source 15 about someone who was a chassid of the Rebbe who lived in Crown Heights, who had a friend who had a son who was around bar mitzvah age. And so he brought his friend and his friend's son, right? He now introduced his friend and his friend's son to the Rebbe, who greeted them with comforting and a warm handshake, requesting them to take a seat. Right? This is going back in like the 1950s when Crown Heights and the Lubavitch court was much more intimate than it was as it went over the years. So the Rebbe briefly blessed the boy and said he should grow up to become a source of pride to Jewish people and their family. They turned to leave. The Rebbe surprised the three with a question, and he said to the boy, "Are you a baseball fan?" The Rebbe Mitzvah boy said that he was. Which team? Yankees or Dodgers? This is in the 50s, so there were Brooklyn Dodgers. So he said, Dodgers. Does your father have the same feeling for the Dodgers as you have? No. Does he take you to games? Every once in a while, my father takes me to a game. We were at a game a month ago. Oh, how was the game? The Rebbe asked him. It was disappointing. By the sixth inning, the Dodgers were losing 9-2, so we decided to leave. The Rebbe said, did the players also leave the game when you left? Rabbi, the players can't leave in the middle of the game. Why not? Asked the Rebbe. Explain to me how it works. Well, there are players and fans, the baseball fan explained. The fans can leave when they like. They're not part of the game. The game could and does continue after they leave. But the players need to stay and try to win until the game is over. That's the lesson I want to teach you in Judaism, the Rebbe said with a smile. You can either be a fan or a player. Be a player. Right? The idea that we get in the game. Right? Even before Nike had it, you have that as well. So the idea of looking at all opportunities as opportunities for religious expression, religious growth, and Jewish engagement. Now, anyone who's read the story of the Rebbe, very famously, the Rebbe never took a vacation. That Joseph Telushkin has it in his biography a lot. And so there's a story that happened with my principal growing up. It's source 16, Rabbi Moshe Hecht was a shliach in New Haven. And he once asked the Rebbe for a blessing before traveling on vacation to Israel. So the Rebbe replied, I understand there's an old age home in Hungary with some elderly Jews and kosher meals are not an option. Can you travel to Israel via Hungary and use your skills to provide the owner to offer, to persuade the owner to offer kosher options to the Jewish residents? Rabbi Hecht would later quip, it's a bad idea to tell the Rebbe you're going on vacation because he gives you more work to do. From the Rebbe's perspective, there's no such thing as a vacation from our purpose in life. Each and every one of our travels, whether for business or pleasure, carries a divine invitation to elevate our journeys and destinations. From the Rebbe's point of view, there's no such thing as downtime. It's always uptime, right? The Rebbe liked positive. He didn't like deadlines. He liked due dates. As the Rebbe taught, if God guides your footsteps somewhere at a specific time, to a specific place, in a specific manner, it is so you can accomplish something there. So this an extension of what we saw Rav Kook applying specifically to athletics and sports. B'chol derachecha do'ehu really is an approach that can be applied to wherever we find ourselves, and we see how that was internalized or expressed by the Lubavitcher Rebbe and internalized by his Hasidim. So therefore, if you're taking a vacation, it's not downtime, it's uptime. It may end up giving you more to do than you think. Not necessarily in terms of billable hours, but in terms of ways to express our Judaism and live it, regardless of where we find ourselves. So for those whose schools are now out for summer, an enjoyable, pleasant summer. We're not taking a vacation. We never take a vacation. Sometimes we have a couple of weeks without classes, but ripped from the headlines, we'll continue with the new season after the summer, and the learning will continue with other classes throughout the summer as well. Wishing all a pleasant summer and lots of uptime to grow into strength.
Thank you. See you